the narrative is that you have to be A+ student, National Honor Society, like have like all these accolades, and that's not true. And there's more than one pathway to success. I taught myself how to code when I was in high school, and I could like rewire cable into my bedroom, but none of these things mattered to my, D+ in geometry or anything like that. But I realized that it mattered to the right organizations, right? And if I did a little bit of research, I could find organizations, foundations, scholarship committees that didn't ask me for a GPA requirement at all, or the GPA requirement was really low. And I ended up winning $130,000 in scholarships and grants as a C student.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are making things happen. My name is Michael T. Johnson, and I'm here with Tyler Kelly. And today we're at Venture Cafe Miami. So Venture Cafe is the largest group of innovators anywhere in the world. So at a Thursday night gathering, you're going to meet some amazing people. So if you're near Venture Cafe City, I highly suggest you check it out. Tonight we have Felecia Hatcher with us. So Felecia, very glad to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having me on the show.
Yeah, welcome to Innovation City. So Felecia is the co-founder of Tribe, Cowork, and Urban Innovation Lab, co-founder of Code Fever Miami, and co-founder of Black Tech Week.
Yes.
Also the author of 5 books, including...
Start Your Business on a Ramen Noodle Budget, The C Student's Guide to Finding Scholarships, which is a creative guide to finding scholarships when your grades suck and your parents are broke, because that was me in high school. The Focus Planner is another one of my books. Poppreneurs, I ran a gourmet popsicle company for 7 years, so it's a recipe and like how-to book for getting into the pop industry. And then the upcoming book, well, it's done, but it's not like out, is our creative guide to finding STEM scholarships.
Wow. Cool. Those are like all amazing titles, by the way.
I'm trying to have a little fun. Because, you have to, right? There's so many books written these days that it needs to stand out, right? Plus,
definitely.
If you're going to write something, you might as well have fun with it.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
So through the books and through your work and in the different organizations, you're on a mission to rid communities across the globe of innovation deserts by working with leaders and government officials to create inclusive and diverse tech startup ecosystems. So definitely need to talk about that.
Yes.
And this event, which is huge in Miami, called Black Tech, all over the country.
Yeah.
Black Tech Week, which is an annual week-long emerging technology conference that creates a magnetic force for attracting talent, resources, and opportunities for minority communities to thrive within the innovation economy. So we need to talk a little bit about that as well.
Absolutely. Let's talk about it all.
Welcome to the show.
Talk about it all. Thank you, guys.
So first off, it sounds like we have a lot to talk about, but just from hearing your book titles, they sound incredibly practical. I don't know if that...
They are.
That seems to be
I'm
the
a practical
common
person.
theme.
Yeah.
So... first of all, how did you become an author and decide to write 5 books?
My mom pushed me to write this book. The first book, it took me 10 years to finish it. So a lot of I had this amazing idea. I'm going to write 10 pages. I don't want to write anymore. 2 years later, I'm going to write 30 pages. It was a lot of that. And my second book took me 6 months. And I figured out I don't really need to sit down and write. I could audio record this on a trip to Clearwater and back, get a transcriber to transcribe it, get it back, and then move forward with the rest of the process. But yeah, I won a bunch of money in scholarships. I was a C student, hence the name of the title. I think my GPA was maybe a 2.7 when I graduated high school. I had a guidance counselor tell me I'd never make it to a college or university, and I just I set out to prove this woman wrong, right? And along the way, I learned how to kind of market myself, because even to this day, right? The narrative is that you have to be a A+ student, National Honor Society, have all these accolades, and that's not true. And there's more than one pathway to success, right? From an educational standpoint, from a life standpoint, we know this as adults, but young people, whether they've had personal tragedy that has affected their grades, they may just not be a good student, in the classroom, because we know all the issues with the kind of the one size fit all curriculum, whatever it is, for whatever reason. They're made to feel like they're just walking GPA, and that's how I felt. But outside of the classroom, I was this amazing student. I was captain of the basketball team, and I was a big sister, and I was in a leader. I was doing all this stuff. I played the clarinet, although I was really bad at it, but I played it for 4 years. And then I taught myself how to code when I was in high school. And I could rewire cable into my bedroom, but none of these things mattered to my, D+ in geometry or anything like that. But I realized that it mattered to the right organizations, right? And if I did a little bit of research, I could find organizations, foundations, scholarship committees that didn't ask me for a GPA requirement at all, or the GPA requirement was really low. And I ended up winning $130,000 in scholarships and grants as a C student. And then my freshman year at Lynn University, along with a friend of mine, James, we decided to start an educational consulting business. And it sounds really sexy and much cooler than what it was, but we were just like, people can pay us to build these programs and help other C students find scholarships and kind of help their parents navigate this process. And it was just one of those things, started in our dorm room, use and abuse everything on the college campus. So our office, in the Student Activity Center was our business office, and it's why not meet clients at the library? We could make it that really cool because they want to go to college. So this is a thing. They won't know that we're just renting this by the hour. And DeVry University and the Urban League and a bunch of churches ended up becoming our clients at 19. So I wrote the book because I no longer wanted to be an educational consultant. But I wanted to help as many students and many parents as possible. And so that's where that first book came from. And then I ran a gourmet popsicle manufacturing company for 7 years called Feverish Pops here in Miami. We were one of the first people to put liquor in popsicles and actually get it to freeze. We were based in the Midtown shops where the big Target is, not too far from here. And it was another one of those things I learned very young how to get very creative with limited resources, and that's literally been the story of my life. And that's kind of the underlining message between all of those books. So Start Your Business on a Ramen Noodle Budget was just hey, all of us have gotten really creative with a pack of ramen noodles, right? So back in college, if you had a little extra money, you can dice up some chicken, maybe light some candles, put a little spice in that. And this 59 cent meal now turns into this gourmet meal, right? And now you have the ramen shop and it's $10 for a bowl of what really, only costs 59 cents. Yeah. And so I was if you can channel that same kind of creativity of throwing all these ingredients in and kind of tapping into limited resources, you can have everything that you need to kind of start a business. And money should not be that barrier. And we can have a broader conversation around that because that feels kind of the work that I do. But at the essence of kind of creating your MVP, kind of honing in on your idea, and then tapping into your community and the people that are around you that can help you either serve as an advisor to you, they can help connect you to the dots, they can help connect you to strategic partners. Those aren't things that require money, money is not a barrier to being able to have those conversations and kind of mining and kind of creating asset maps of the people that are around you. And that's pretty much the premise of the book.
That's awesome. So let's start with Code Fever Miami. Mm-hmm. So just tell me the why behind that.
Yeah. So Code Fever, and even the name came from, we started it when we were running our gourmet popsicle company, Feverish Pops. Wilfredo, I don't know if you guys have interviewed him yet, that founded Lab Miami. He actually came up with the name for us. Okay. And so we started it. There were a few reasons that got us to the point where we started Code Fever and officially started it. But, Derek and I have backgrounds in tech and in marketing, and we just started this, gourmet popsicle company when the economy tanked in 2008. I wanted to do something that made us smile. We also really love desserts. We got married at a hippie donut shop. That's just us. And And I wanted to also train our employees in the most marketable skills possible. We knew that they weren't going to be in popsicles forever. We weren't going to be in popsicles forever. But we just knew that them having a strong understanding in what was happening in Miami as like the startup ecosystem was just starting to sprout out, but there were a lot of resources coming to the community that was not inclusive of the Black community at all. So that was one part. The other part is like we, as entrepreneurs, we had a lot of really cool friends that were doing a lot of really cool things that also were not being invited to any of the events, any of the pitch competitions, like none of that. And we knew that whether they were in tech or not in tech, they could directly benefit from those resources. So there was just this huge disconnect. And so we settled on like just doing this literally a one-day event for our employees, like their friends and their family. And like, we're going to teach you how to code. And we're going to bring all our cool friends that do really cool stuff into this day. We'll do a panel. We'll get food. We did it at Lab Miami. Wilfredo came up with the name for the event, like not like an organization 5 years later. And we ended up having over 80 people show up. And then being bombarded like the next few weeks from parents of like, when are you doing this again? And we're like, we're not. Like, we're trying to run this company and trying to like keep it afloat and like grow it. We want to support another organization that was doing that. And at the time, we were working with organizations in Atlanta, doing that kind of work, right? But no one was doing it here in Miami. And so that kind of became the push to like, let's turn this into something more official. Let's do more programming. And we started off as a coding and startup school. So we would work with mostly nonprofits and organizations and literally bring everything to them, right? And so we would bring the instructors, we would bring the laptops, we would bring the food, because a lot of the organizations that we worked with in the early days did not actually have the infrastructure to actually take on or run a coding boot camp. Either Wi-Fi was an issue, they didn't have the computers. There was just like a number of long things that they did not have. And so we started to be able to provide those things so that none of those things were a barrier from them fully understanding what was taking place, but then also getting the skills. So 3 different buckets for Code Fever. One, getting the technical training, right? So intro to computer programming, full stack development, basic digital literacy. It never sounds as sexy as coding, but you can't have one before the other. And then like how to navigate a startup ecosystem as a person of color are the 3 kind of buckets of like how we train with our programs with Code Fever. Wow.
And then that's to mostly an audience that's brand new to that whole space. For
the most part, yeah. So, mostly, and most of the students that we train are between 10 and 21. And mostly the African American and Caribbean community, although we train literally everybody. And as a result of our work, we've introduced over 4,000 students to computer programming and digital literacy and like entrepreneurship, like training over the past 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing because a lot of times you think about doing like a coding curriculum or something, and you're thinking up here, but it's like, well, you got to have this first.
Right. And quite frankly, a lot of organizations don't understand that, especially in the early days. They were just like, we want them to be able to like do this in the end of 6 weeks, but I'm like, that they don't know where the backspace button is, right? Because most of our students are using their phones than actually using, keyboards. And that's a problem. So we have to first kind of solve for this. And you have to also kind of tailor your expectations that they're not going to be able to learn like how to code in 6 weeks. We may be talking about more like 6 months because there's a long road to get to that point. And then the cultural aspect of that is also equally important, right? And so how they're introduced to technology, how they see themselves in the technology space. So like none of what we could do from a technical training standpoint matters if you don't see how you fit into that space. If you don't see from a career standpoint how you can make money in that space. If your parents don't understand that, they are going to be, they're going to stand in the way of you being able to succeed in this program. And we realized all of those things in the early days because we're like, oh, we're going to like train millions of kids. And then we're just like, we get into the classroom and just like, ma'am, I don't know what HTML stands for. I don't know where the H is, and like we can kind of like laugh at that, but that was very, very serious issues in the beginning, and still to this day are things that we have to kind of solve for before we're able to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like problems you would never think would pop up are huge barriers. So, and one of the things that you mentioned was, starting back in 2008 and kind of the entrepreneurial scene back then.
Yeah.
Here we are in 2019, so like 20 years later,
10,
21 years,
10.
11.
You're aging me.
See, I told you.
Goodness gracious. Come on, man.
Sorry. Here we are in like 2019, so 10 or 11 years later. What changes have you seen in kind of this scene, and like where there's still a long ways to go?
Oh my God, everything has changed, right? Like CSE wasn't here, like back in 2008. A lot. I mean, I think everything that people are seeing right now, it did not exist, right? So I think this atmosphere of collaboration, but then like just this huge focus on like startups and technology. And it's interesting because like you look at like South Florida as a whole, like IBM like built their first computer here in South Florida, right? And so like this whole kind of technology conversation is not new to South Florida, but like this new wave of it, right? This new kind of activity, this new kind of excitement. We're an entrepreneurial community, right? Especially because of the huge immigrant population that we have here. And my family's from Jamaica, so like we start businesses out of necessity, right? And so, but it's a different kind of conversation that's exciting, right? And then I think the whole even conversation around just kind of scaling businesses is something new that you didn't really have that conversation with maybe 5 to 10 years ago. Well, more so 10 years ago, right? We have a lot of mom and pop businesses, and kind of like when mom and dad don't want to do this anymore, and the kid has moved on because the job opportunities weren't there, like that business just kind of dies. And now you can have a different kind of conversation with those mom and pop businesses, like, hey, maybe this can become more tech enabled, right? And so like you don't actually physically have to be here, and now this is something that excites your child, and they're not going to move on to Silicon Valley, but they're going to stay here because the environment now makes sense for them. They can see the outlook and kind of trajectory of like where they can go, and they can have a really fun lifestyle here and kind of get everything that you're kind of searching for everywhere else, right? Miami is not a plug-and-play city, and that's the other thing. I think it's becoming more of that, but New York is very much a plug-and-play, right? You can just kind of drop down whatever your interest is. You can kind of find it. You can plop in. You can go to it, and you're good. Miami is very much one of those things where if it's not here, but you're committed to building it here, it can be the city for you. But you're going to have to put the hard hat on and like do the work in order to build the thing that you want. And that's for us, myself, my husband, Derek, is what we've experienced over the past 10 years, right? And so a really amazing community that truly supports Black entrepreneurs didn't really exist 10 years ago. But we were committed to living here, so we had to become play a really active leadership role in kind of shaping that and cultivating that, attracting the attention and the resources to that. But then not even just when we're talking about the Black community, but the startup community overall, like had to put on the hard hat again. And so those are the kind of the things that we're seeing. I think for the future of Miami as it relates to tech and startup, I think what I would love to see is more innovation around the things that South Florida and really the state win a gold medal in, right? And so you're thinking of some of our hospitality industry, our trade and logistics, healthcare, real estate and construction. You don't see enough people building like tech-enabled companies or tech companies around to solve for those problems, because I think that's how we become number one on the right kind of list, yeah. Right? We're never going to be Silicon Valley. We're never going to be New York, but we can be Florida, right? We can be South Florida and be known for this kind of innovation in these particular lanes and be able to be number one or a leader in that and be able to attract people and attract the resources because we're known for that kind of output on an ongoing basis.
All right, so Code Fever kind of addresses this neophyte to technology, specifically in the African American community.
Yeah.
And then Black Tech Week, these are founders of companies, but you're still providing education and resources
Correct.
for African American founders that might not be able to find that information or that leadership, collaboration, anywhere else. All of the above.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, so we started, we started Black Tech Week, and we're into the 5th year. One, because like as a training organization, like we wanted to move away from the train and pray model, right? Which a lot of organizations are in. Like you're training and you're praying that there's an opportunity on the other end of this training program, right? Once your students graduate, and oftentimes the community does not have anything else for them to do. So you're kind of putting them up on this cliff and just like, you're done, and we wanted to, as much as possible, ensure that there were internship opportunities, mentorship opportunities, job opportunities, or just as much as possible clear pathways, right? And we couldn't ensure that a few years ago. And so that's where Black Tech Week became really important. There was also a study that came out that said in order to increase the number of minorities that are hired, especially in STEM fields, you first have to increase the number of companies that are founded by these people. Because when you are from a minority group and you are in a position, a hiring authority, you're more than likely to give that person their first chance, right? That's not just from a race or ethnic standpoint, that's from a gender standpoint, even like a sexual preference standpoint. Like we see that over and over again, right? And so we had to also try and figure out, like, how do we solve for this? How do we, if not any other time throughout the rest of the year, we can ensure like 1 week that all the resources that you could possibly need, if you wanted to launch a technology company or just launch a business period, or if you wanted to pursue a career in STEM, like we would bring all those resources to Miami. And so we bring in just amazing thought leaders, badass speakers, like geniuses that are just like killing it, not just here in the United States, but ultimately like across the globe. Investors, people who had incubators and accelerators, the CEO of Y Combinator, like we partnered with Venture Cafe, I think if not last year, the year before, and had him here. It was one of his first times here in Miami. I think we had almost 700 people RSVP for that event. I know Leanne wanted to kill us because they're just like, there's too many people here, right? But like bringing all those people down, and so one, it's providing all the resources for the community that we've built here. But the other part of that is getting as many of these eyeballs onto what's going on in Miami, because they don't think people work in Miami, right? Can we talk about that?
Sure.
No one out here thinks that we actually work, or have serious business, or serious companies are being launched and built here. And so, and quite frankly, that was the conversation that my husband Derek had with Michael Seibel for 2 years. We tried to get him, and he was like, this is a really cool idea, but why Miami? Because if this was in San Francisco, it absolutely makes sense. And we're like, no, you need to come here and see. And so when he finally said yes and was able to kind of experience it, it changes their perspective on what's going on here. And then it also makes them think differently about like how they're going to invest their dollars. We take them and we put the conferences in neighborhoods that most people aren't doing their conferences in. It's not on South Beach. It's not at a hotel. It's in Little Haiti. It's in Overtown. It's in, Miami-Dade College North Campus. And we're in Little Havana. Like, we're all over the places and neighborhoods that we want people to explore and ultimately also spend their dollars. Like, when people come down, or not just here in South Florida, but when people come to conferences, they spend money. They have to eat. They have to stay somewhere. And, like, why can't, if we're bringing a few hundred or a few thousand people to an area, why wouldn't you bring it to an area where those dollars need to be generated and need to be spent, and you can actually have a direct economic impact?
How many people come into Miami for Black Tech Week?
So our largest Black Tech Week, we had about 1,600 participants in the entire week. And I say participants because it's a series of events, right? And so not only do we have the conference, which is usually about 2 days of that, we do youth programming, we do a big women's innovation brunch. We usually have one big free community event there. We have a huge youth family tech day that we do. And then we have partners that come in and do programming. Comcast comes in and hosts 100 entrepreneurs for like a private dinner. So there's a lot that goes on, some that we curate, some that other partners curate as well. And then last year we set out on a national tour with the conference. So the full week will always be in Miami with Knight Foundation as our founding partner. That's just kind of our commitment to Miami. But we got a lot of requests over the past few years, like, bring this to our city. And so we created Black Tech Weekend, which is a 1-day or 2-day experience that also better connects with the pain points in those local areas. So depending on the city that we went to, the content and the programming looked a little bit different depending on like what the needs were in those cities. So
that's cool. Have you been to St. Louis yet?
We did Kansas City.
Okay.
I know it's not
We
the
gotta get you to
same,
St.
but
Louis.
like I would love to do St. Louis.
Yeah. So a lot of times when people think about Miami, so you've talked about kind of a history of entrepreneurship in Miami all the way back to 2008 and before that. When people think about Miami, they think of a very diverse city, but obviously there are issues with inclusion, which, I mean, that's the whole reason Black Tech Week exists and things like that. So how do we tackle that challenge of inclusion in such a diverse city with so many resources?
Yeah. I think, one, we have to be very honest about what Miami is and what it's not, right? And so it is very diverse, but it's diverse by default and not intention. And so as much as we kind of lean on that, it also handicaps us in the way of never actually trying to figure out like how to fix that problem. And it's the other side of that is it's also a lot of grassroots organizations trying to fix that problem, and it also needs to be top down, right? And so there are policy changes that can be made to better support like that kind of activity so that we can all kind of meet in the middle and actually have an impact. I wish I knew the one-stop solution to fixing that, which is also the problem, because I think everyone's looking for like that one thing, and it's a lot of little things, right, that make that change. And from an innovation startup standpoint, we're doing that work. I think Venture Cafe, Tech Bites and Beats, like there's all these organizations that are doing work in different kind of buckets. But then when we talk about our housing issues, like that also has to be figured out around like diversity and inclusion. Our K through 12 system, our like everyone that's a part of like this ecosystem has to do their part and be very intentional about what that is. I always make recommendations like, why don't we give away like top diversity awards with major corporations here? Like we celebrate everything else, right? And some people may think that's very superficial, but it's like corporations like to compete. And so like how can we make them compete on like who has the most diverse hiring practices here? Who has the most diverse social corporate responsibility like initiatives and missions here? Like some company wants to tout that flag, and when they do that and personally kind of take that ownership, we'll start to see some changes that then kind of trickle down to everything else, right? But like it has to start somewhere, and then it also has to start everywhere, like all at the same time.
That's a very good point, because I mean, it sounds like there is no one solution, but also from everything you've told us today, there's all these little things that you've done or you've experienced over the past 10, 15 years that are little things that chip away at it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's because I can't pinpoint to a city that gets it absolutely right, and there's so many different kind of layers to the conversation here because, from a marketing standpoint, like Miami is seen as a very diverse city, right? But when you peel back the layers, like even for us, like I can't, like we're called Black Tech Week because if I say African American, it's not actually inclusive enough. Because if you are from the Caribbean, you actually don't associate yourself as African, or you don't label yourself as African American, right? And so like Black is actually more inclusive, although most people think that it's not inclusive. I'm like, that is the most inclusive way that we can like make sure that everyone in the diaspora is actually like included in the work that we're doing, other than that we're leaving people out, right? And then when you even think about like our innovation economy here in South Florida, where our Hispanic community is like the majority here, but our low income Hispanic community is really never a part of the conversation or the activity or the support or the resources when we're talking about our innovation economy. That's never a part of the conversation, right? And so there's all these other areas when we talk about diversity, and then diversity is not just race, right? Like there are all these layers of how like all of us kind of show up into these rooms and are trying to figure out like how do we fit in, how do we contribute, but then also how do we make sure that this is a place that everyone feels like they're being heard, like they're being taken care of, that they feel safe. It requires a ton of people kind of working on this. Not even kind of, working on this. Yeah, sorry.
So what's obviously this week, you've had a lot going on because while we're recording the show, it's Black Tech Week right now. So what has happened this week, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, a lot. You know, we finished up our Government EduCon, which is our Government Education and Tech Day, which we launched for the first time last year. And so we had a few mayors come in from other cities kind of talking about like what they're doing around this innovation economy, what they're doing from an infrastructure standpoint to make sure that they can have an innovation economy, how they're better supporting their entrepreneurs. So some really exciting conversations from some cities that you would be really surprised, right? So like we had the mayor here from Augusta, Georgia, and people were just like, Augusta, Georgia? And when he started talking about like what they are doing, one, the amount of funding that they've been able to bring, like how they have structured their the amount of major corporations that are in Augusta, Georgia. I was like, my husband's from like South Georgia. I know, you're just not you're thinking of Atlanta and you don't really think about the rest of Georgia, unfortunately, right? And so it was really interesting to get his perspective on like, what does it mean? And how does all this work when you're really intentional about attracting the dollars, attracting the resources, and kind of building community around innovation, but then also being able to lead the smart cities conversation, because when people are having those conversations, Black communities are actually never a part of that. And I asked that question to AT&T was the presenting sponsor of the day, so they are rolling out 5G, or their plan is to like roll out 5G in a lot of these cities, and kind of asking them like, what Black community in the United States do you think is best positioned to kind of lead as the model like smart city? And so Atlanta is always gonna be like number one, right? But like we're like, what is number two? Like what are you seeing? Because a lot of these communities are doing some really innovative stuff around using, figuring out like smart cities and like kind of this technology and kind of connecting community to be more efficient, to make sure like the data is open that's coming from the local government so people can actually build and be impactful. I think Miami Gardens is doing some really interesting things that are just never a part of that conversation. But then I think also when you talk about entrepreneurs and startups, and then you talk about government, the procurement opportunity, right, which is something that we've been trying to figure out from a programmatic standpoint quite a bit, because I like everyone in our world like looks at like lean startup principles as like the go-to of how to do this stuff, right? And not to make general statements, but a lot of the entrepreneurs that are in our network, like the first part they already can't get right. If you need the friends and family round, and you friends and family can only give you a round of applause and like not an actual round of funding, like you're already like, you can't even take that first step, right? You already don't have the luxury to be able to like innovate. You have no funding to like leave your job and like fully focus on this idea. You can't go to that conference for 3 days during the day because you cannot take off of work, right? Or you can't leave. Like there's all these issues that make that system problematic for a lot of minority groups. And so when we're talking about government can also play a much bigger role, right? Because a contract is just as good as some seed funding a lot of times, right? Good old customer funding. Like who would have thought that you can still run a business with customers and contracts? And so procurement processes and kind of bringing all those entrepreneurs and techies into a room with government officials, because we speak two different languages, and that's the bigger part of the problem, right? And you'll hear government over and over again, like, you gotta sell what we're buying, right? And we're like, no, we're selling what you're buying, but you don't understand what we're selling you. So like, how do we bring that together and kind of stop that gap so that the funding can flow, the procurement opportunities are there, the solutions are getting solved by them, and then the funding issue is being able to be solved, so entrepreneurs, but then they also can see the ideas that they can be creating, so we're not creating like another social networking like app. Yeah.
Well, I have, it feels like we could probably talk for another couple hours, but I know you have a lot going on still. So tell everyone how they can get in touch with, we didn't even talk about Tribe. We'll save that for another show.
Yeah.
But tell everyone how they can get in touch with each of the three, businesses that you run. How they can get your books, catch you on social, all of the above.
Perfect. So they're not actually three different businesses. Code Fever is our organization. Black Tech Week and Space Called Tribe are initiatives under Code Fever. Okay. I know it sounds, most people are like, oh man, like how are you doing so? I was like, no, they're all like one organization. It's a lot, right? But the problem is also really big. But CodeFeverMiami.com is our website. blacktechweek.com, Space Call Tribe. They all have websites, but if you go to Code Fever, you get connected to everything. If you want to check out any of my books or my planners, Felecia Hatcher, and that's Felecia with 2 E's, F-E-L-E. Oh my God, I'm forgetting my name. F-E-L-E, it's a long week, right? FeleciaHatcher.com, F-E-L-E-C-I-A is how you spell Felecia, is the best way. And then I'm in and around Miami and pretty easy to find. So stop by Space Call Tribe anytime.
Amazing. Felecia, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you guys for having me.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you're in Miami, visit us on Thursday nights. Details are at venturecafemiami.org. And be sure to connect with us on social at We Are Slam and at Venture Cafe MIA. Thanks for listening.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This